In a world where everyone knows everything. Yeah, right. One dad stands below everyone and yells, "I know nothing."
Please welcome.
This is the Dad Who Knows Nothing podcast.
Well, welcome everyone to the Dad Who Knows Nothing podcast. Very excited to have Mike Cavaggioni on. He is originally from Long Island, New York, up from my neck of the woods, but now he's currently living in Hawaii. Joined the Navy in 2002. He served there for 20 years, but when he got out of the Navy, and probably a little bit before that career ended, he got into real estate and got into being a financial coach, real estate investor. And like I always love to have other podcast hosts on my show, he's also a podcast host of the Average Joe Finances podcast, which is a top 1% internationally ranked podcast. So we have a great guest today. So very excited to have you here, Mike. So glad you could give us a few minutes of your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right. So there's so many places I could go. I could pick your brain for 2 hours on just how you became a top 1% podcast host. So many questions that I still have, right? Because I'm just starting in my podcast journey. But I think one of the things that will really resonate with my listeners is the whole financial freedom stuff. And passive income, as you know, that term is thrown around a lot as one of the ways for people to kind of be able to have that financial freedom. And so what's the most important things? Let's just start with personal finance to start. What are the most important things that someone needs to know about personal finance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that the most important thing is understanding that, understanding your debt, right? Understanding what good debt is, understanding what bad debt is. Examples would be credit cards and things like that. Credit cards can actually sometimes be good debt depending on how you use them, but what you see the average person getting involved with credit cards is overuse, making minimum payments, not paying them off on time, and paying these astronomical interest rates, right? So that's one of the biggest things, is understanding where you're at in reality when it comes to how much money you make and how much money is outgoing, right? So how much you're spending, how much you're saving. So the first thing you want to look at is, what is my income? What are my expenses? How much can I afford to save, right? Once you have a good understanding of that, that's when you can start taking it to the next steps, right? But I think the thing that most people struggle with, and it's the thing that I struggled with the most as well, was this debt problem. And it was, I had credit cards. I had $28,000 in credit card debt. I had multiple personal loans just because I was trying to get out ahead of something. Because at the time I had to short sell a home, my first property that I ever bought. I bought it in 2007, and we know what happened the very next year, right? So bad timing for me, but it happens, and I was able to recover from that. And the way I recovered was realizing that I had this debt that had to go first before I did anything else.
Right. And do you think that for a lot of people that you work with, do you think that this, because it sounds simple, right? Know how much you have coming in versus how much you have going out, and where you may be losing money when it comes to fees or interest and that sort of thing. That's really correctable if some of the debt is paid off. Do you think that a lot of people just don't take that first step? Do you see that a lot?
Yeah, I do. It's because it's a lot easier than it sounds, right? You could sit here and talk about it all day and say, oh, yeah, no problem. Yeah, I know I got to pay off my credit cards. No problem. Well, you need to come up with an actual plan to do that. If you just sit here and say you're going to do it, and you keep saying it, and you don't actually do anything, then you're just going to be stuck in this rut forever, right? And that's the trap that I think most people find themselves in, is that they keep saying they're going to do it. And they're like, yeah, I know what I need to do. I know what I need to do. I'm going to get to it. But they don't discipline themselves to actually take that action and start the process.
Yeah. And then I think the other piece to that is when somebody talks about a plan and you say the word plan, I say the word plan, when we're talking about what someone needs to do with their personal financial situation, the next word that comes into people's minds is budget. And a budget has all this negative connotation. It's like, oh, I'm not going to be able to have fun. I'm not going to be able to go out to eat. I'm not going to be able to do any of this stuff. And there may be a little bit of that, but I think what you probably find with your clients that actually get down and do it, that the adjustments that they can make that can make a big impact really can still allow them that flexibility to still go and do that. And what they end up cutting away, they don't really miss.
100%. And the infamous B word, right? Budget. Like you said, it does have a lot of negative connotation around that. I've used that word in the past, but I like to call it a spending plan now, right?
Yeah.
It's that mental shift, right, that you have when you change your mindset, which is really the first thing you need to do. And that's when you decide that you're going to take that action, right? And you change your mindset and you start moving forward. And there's so many little things you can do to make this journey fun for, if you're married, if you have a partner, if you're just doing it by yourself, there's little ways that you could celebrate these small wins that will motivate you to keep going, right? So one of the things I like to do is, I started off the way a lot of people do by following Dave Ramsey's baby steps, right? Following steps 1 through 3, just doing that debt snowball thing, right? But one of the things I did differently that I felt really helped me stay on track was each time I paid off a credit card or had like a really big win when it comes to that, I would go out and celebrate. My wife and I would go out to dinner, we'd take the kids out, and we would have a good time and do that. Because we would specifically put money to the side for what we called fun money. And that was to be used when we celebrate things or just go out maybe, once or twice a month and just make sure that we're not, slaves to our spending plan, and that we're just, stuck chipping away at that and not, living life at all, right? Because if you find yourself in that situation where you're just chipping away and chipping away and chipping away and doing nothing else, eventually you're not going to know how to live life, right? You're going to get stuck and you're going to be like, you're going to spend out, either you're going to get burnt out or you're going to pay off everything and be like, what do I do now? Right. So it's important that you still continue to live your life and enjoy life while you're doing this. And that's one of the things with people that I work with that I try to focus on, like, hey, you don't need to just shut everything down, but you need to discipline yourself and realize what your needs are versus what your wants are.
Yeah, and mindset is such an important thing because I think sometimes in line with that word budget, people think of it like I'm not in control. This is a budget that is here and it's like over my head and I have to live up to this, or I have to live within these constraints. But to your point, just phrasing it as a spending plan now empowers the individual to say, you know what, this is my plan. This is what I'm going to stick to. And I think what I've found even with myself, and most others probably feel this, is it's not the big events where you go out and have a good time that happen a couple times a month, right? It's the daily bottle of water here, cup of Starbucks here, all these types of things that over the course of the month are a couple $100 that can really make a huge impact in paying off some of that bad debt.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I mean, that's the stuff that sneaks up on you because you're not really paying attention to it, which is why it's important to have a plan. It's important to pay attention to your bank account to see what charges are happening. I always say, look back the last 90 days and let's average out how much you spend on groceries. Let's average out how much you spend on going out to eat. Let's average out how much you spend on your cups of coffee over at Starbucks, right? Some people get very surprised when they realize, wow, I spent $1,000 at Starbucks over the past 3 months. That's insane. So,
yeah. I mean, one venti coffee a day, if you're on your way to work, that adds up really quick. All right. So obviously we know with personal finance, we could talk about that the entire time, probably because of all the different pitfalls that are there in managing your personal finance. But let's say somebody has that pretty well in hand. They have their budget, they have their spending plan, they've paid off all of the bad debt. So now they have a choice of what they're going to invest in. Stock markets, the bonds are really, priced well right now with the market. Why do you invest in real estate?
Well, now I invest in those other things as well, right? I invest in the stock market too, but just not as heavily as I do with real estate. So for me, real estate, the way I looked at it is, and the way I still look at it is, it's one of those asset classes. It's a need, right? There's a big difference between a piece of paper saying that I own a piece of this company versus a deed to an actual property that I own, with land that I own, right? And it's just that real tangible asset. People will always need a place to live. Nike might not always be in business, right? Apple might not always be in business. It only takes one CEO to come in and make a couple bad decisions to bankrupt the company. Now everything that you had in there is worth zero.
Or to
right?
say the wrong thing.
Right, or to say the wrong thing, and you see it happen, right? You see
Right.
some bigger companies that have gone under, and it happens. Now, will it ever happen to Apple? I hope not, because I like my iPhone, right? But you never know. So the thing with real estate is, sure, the market can tank, right? Same thing with the stock market, right? We watch that, it tanks and it comes back up. It's consistent, right? Same thing with the real estate market. If the real estate market tanks like it did back in 2008, 2009, we've seen it come back up from there and increase ever so much between 2020 and now with the pandemic that we had. And the thing is, like, there's still a housing shortage. Even after all of this, we still have a housing shortage of over, I think it's over 1 million homes. It's way more than that. But so there's this huge housing shortage. Now we have this supply chain shortage, right? So we have people that they developers that can't finish projects or can't build or can't even start projects because they're, we have the supply chain issue. We have lumber shortages and all that. Now, a lot of that has come back and bounced back since then. But when you see this, you see the value of that real estate really start to go up, right? Now, we're at a point where we're kind of stabilized right now, I think. I don't see like a huge crash coming. Some people are calling for it. Some people are saying not. But the thing is, even if that does happen, it's going to be very market specific. It's going to happen in certain areas, not all areas, right? I'll give you an example. Where I live at in Hawaii, it was even hard to buy a house 4.5 years ago when I moved here, right? The fifth house that we put a contract on is the one that we finally got to move into, right? And people during the pandemic were like putting in offers on 20 plus houses before finally getting one. And the thing is, like, the market, it shifts and it shifts and it shifts. But the thing out here is it consistently has gone up about 5% a year, 3 to 5% a year, sometimes more. Since the pandemic happened, it's gone up about 15% to 20% in 1 year, which is really insane when you think about the property values out here. But anyway, that's the thing about real estate, right? The people are always going to need a place to live. Sorry, I'm like kind of going off on a rant here, but people are always going to need a place to live. When you have these properties and you're renting them out, right? Rent will go up, pretty much every year. It's got to stay consistent with, where the market is and where inflation's going. You got to keep up with it, right? But think about the person that bought that property, right, on a 30-year mortgage. Their mortgage isn't going to change, right? But they're increasing rent. So they're still using yesterday's dollars, yesterday's debt on today's income, right? So people are still paying the rent at, higher rates as it goes up, and you're still paying yesterday's dollars. And that's one of the beautiful things that I love about real estate debt is you can use debt and real estate to make more money. And again, I know I'm kind of going off on a rant here. I'm just trying to touch so many different pieces about why I love real estate. Personally, I have a HELOC on my property. I use something called velocity banking, where I take my equity out of my house and I use it to buy more real estate. This was money that was just sitting in my house because I bought it and it sat here and it increased in value, right? So instead of just letting that sit there, I said, let me use it and buy more real estate, which is exactly what I did. So the thing is, with real estate, you can continue to scale and scale and scale without having to put too much more into it after you have your initial push into investing. Whereas if you're investing in the stock market or anything else, you have to continuously keep putting money into it and keep, and having it compound, right? Which is great. You can make a lot of money in the stock market. But I prefer real estate just because, I don't have to put that much more into it after my initial purchase.
Yeah, and there's not too many investments. I can't think of any where banks will line up to pay to allow you to borrow 80% of the value
Yeah.
because they understand, the aside from these few moments, over the last 20, 25, 30 years where there's been a downshift in the market, aside from those, even financial institutions understand, the value of having real estate in your portfolio.
Yeah, 100%. And again, it's not just real estate. Like I said, you can make wealth. You could build your wealth
Mm-hmm.
anywhere, right? Whether it's in the stock market, it's in crypto, which I don't really know too much about crypto. I've had people come on my show to talk to me about it and explain it to me. It's still Greek. I'm still trying to learn more about it, but blockchain technology is great, right? And you say that, and that makes people's head turn. And but the technology there is pretty awesome. How I do think it will affect real estate in the future.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
you're going to see like deeds and notes and everything be on blockchain because you can't change that, right? So it's a great way uh to keep everything valid, right? To make sure that you're really getting what you're buying. It'll be harder to scam people in the
Right.
future when it comes to that. So I think that's fantastic. So I think blockchain technology is great. But no matter whatever you're interested in, whether it's real estate, the stock market, crypto, whatever it is, I have 4 pillars of building wealth that I think are the most important pillars that are going to help you no matter what niche you decide to go into to build wealth. And that's education is the first one. Mentorship and coaching is the second one. Networking and building relationships is the third one. And then the fourth one is the most important because the other 3 don't matter if you don't do it. And that's take action.
Yeah, I love those because, some people you can tell they read all the books, right? They talk to all the people and but they're just hamstrung to taking action and they're always worried about the risks, they're always worried about, and that stuff is all stuff that needs to be considered, but it shouldn't prevent you from taking action. And I compare it to like salespeople who build up all this value and talk about the value of their product, and then they don't ask for the sale, they don't ask to actually finish the deal. So uh, good pillars there, because you're right. If the fourth one doesn't happen, the other 3 don't matter.
Yeah, and it's analysis paralysis, right?
Right.
It's what, a lot of people get themselves to the point where they're like, I'm gonna do this. I read the books, I watched the videos, I listened to the podcasts. I have some great mentors, or I'm even paying a coach, right? And first of all, if you're paying a coach to do it, that's gonna help push you to take action anyway, because now you're spending money to hold yourself accountable, right?
Yeah.
But I'm out there networking and building relationships, that's great. But if you don't take that first step and go out there and find that first deal and make it happen, you're just going to sit around and keep reading more books and going to meetups and keep talking about what you're going to do, but never actually do it. So it's important. That action piece is the most important one.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a financial coach, do you help individuals take action?
I do. So like that's one of the things I try to push people towards is like it's not just about, building this spending plan and getting you to the point where, you can get rid of your consumer debt and get yourself to a point where you feel comfortable to invest. But I'm going to push you along and say, hey, now's the time to start, right? And now, if you want to go into like the stock market or anything like that, like I'm not going to sit here and give you investment advice, right? Like I'm not licensed to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, you need to go talk to a financial advisor if this is the route you want to go. If you want to go into real estate, I am happy to talk to you about that as a real estate investor and also as a real estate agent, right? So happy to help you look and search, help you find some possible good investment properties or anything like that. But most of that stuff's going to happen off market anyway. So I usually have to take my realtor hat off if I'm working with a real estate investor. But I'll introduce them to wholesalers. I'll introduce them to other people that are doing it especially people that kind of just got started maybe a year ago or 2 years ago,
Mm.
because it's still really fresh for them and they can really explain like, hey, this is what I did to knock out my first deal. I give them all the resources that they need. I highly recommend anybody that wants to invest in real estate, go and check out Bigger Pockets, right? The forum, and go listen to their podcast, because that is probably the thing, one of the catalysts that really pushed me over the edge to go further and start really pursuing investing in real estate.
Bigger Pockets, got it. Writing that down, and all of my listeners should be writing that down too. Biggerpockets.com.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about side hustles. So some people have, there's a whole gig economy out there. Side hustles like mine's usually go to like being an Uber driver, being a pizza delivery driver, late at night after working, maybe bartending, side hustles. And I think the market for side hustles has grown exponentially with all the different digital things that are going on. So what kinds of side hustles make sense for somebody that works full time? Do you have any that you like?
Sure. So my coaching is a side hustle, right? Because I
Yeah.
started this when I was still active duty in the Navy. So I was still working full time and I was doing the coaching on the side. I even got my real estate license and I was doing that on the side. But I wasn't like actually helping um, clients like myself at the time, because I felt like if I couldn't give them 100%, because I'm still active duty, like I didn't want to be the guy that says, "Oh, I'll get to you, when I finish work today," right?
Right.
So what I did is I did referrals, and I would, meet people that wanted to buy property or anything like that, and I would refer them over to another agent in my brokerage, and they would take care of them, and then I would get a piece of that commission, right? So I'd get my referral fee. So that was a nice little side hustle for me as well. Um, but there's so many different things you can do. You can do some digital work on Upwork or Fiverr. I had a guest on my podcast come on and explain to me how they left their full-time job because they started doing side hustles on Fiverr, right? And they built up to the point where they were making $200,000 to $300,000 a year just doing these, like writing blog posts, copywriting, doing press releases and things like that. It was absolutely amazing. So there's definitely ways you can do that. I drove Uber for a little while too, and as a matter of fact, one of the things I did with that I thought was super fun is, and this was pre-pandemic, right? But I would get up on the weekends really early. I always get up early anyway, being in the military. So I would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, right? And I would drive over to the airport and I would pick in those first incoming flights. I would pick people up from the airport, drive them down to Waikiki, right? But one day I picked up this guest, or I picked up a client that I was driving, and he runs a like a tourist event thing out here. Like basically, they do luau's and different like zip lines and different events, right? So he gave me a whole bunch of pamphlets and said, "Hey man," he's like, as you're picking people up from the airport, if they're coming out here and they want to do any of these events, if they call me and say that you sent them, I'll Venmo you $20. So I said, okay, cool. So I started another little side hustle there where I kept all these pamphlets in the back of my car as well. I'd pick people up from the airport and be like, hey, yeah, while you're here, why don't you check out blah, blah, blah. Tell them Mike sent you. You'll get a discount, whatever. So I started doing that, and I'd get money from Ubering. I would get money from when people signed up for these different events. And it was pretty nice. And it got me thinking about, how it was almost like affiliate marketing in real life, right? Which was awesome. But that's another thing I do as well on the side. So if there's a product that I really like that I use myself, I will affiliate with them and, promote it on my podcast or show it to other people. And when people sign up with it, I get a piece of that. So there's so many different ways that you can, have like little side hustles that all add up. But for me, it was all about having several streams of income, right? It wasn't just about the side hustle itself. And I don't drive Uber anymore right now, right? Like I said, that was all pre-pandemic stuff, but it was that kind of like thinking outside of the box stuff that I think really helped me out. Because like besides just the Uber, like having that separate thing with the tourist things that were going on. I was like, this is pretty good. Like, this is a good way to make a couple bucks and fuel my hobby of being a podcaster. So
There you go. I like it. So when we're looking at, you mentioned one of your 4 pillars is networking. Why is that so important to you?
it is probably the most important, if you ask me. Networking, building a good network, building relationships with people, especially if you invest in real estate, you never know who you're going to meet, right? So I go to all these different real estate meetups out here in Hawaii. I go to real estate conferences. I even host my own meetup. I just started my own meetup this month. And now it's every second Wednesday of the month out here on Oahu. And had my first meetup, and it was fantastic. And the people that you meet, you never know. Like, I was talking to a couple people there that I might even partner up with in the future on a deal, right? So, but it's meeting like-minded people. It's not just meeting people in general, right? It's meeting like-minded people that are trying to do what you want to do, or people that are already doing what you want to do, right? You can pick their brains. You can kind of say, hey, I'm new to this. This is something I'm interested in doing. What was it like when you first started? So, and you'll find that I would say 97% of the people in this community are just so giving and generous, and they're willing to give back. And they're like, oh yeah, well, schedule a call with me. It's going to cost this much. No, you don't really see that. Like, you see people saying, oh yeah, hey, this is what I did. These are some of the resources I use, and this and that and whatever. And that's one of the things that I think is the most important piece of that networking piece, is that you start building those relationships, you get to know these people, and they become future partners, right? Not necessarily everybody, but it's one of those things that you can't. Real estate is a team sport, right?
Mhm.
Sure, you can do it by yourself. You're going to be stuck for a while, right? And you're not going to be able to scale anywhere as quickly if you didn't do it with partners, right? So that's the biggest thing. And it's one of the things I've realized too. When I first started off and I was kind of in it by myself and said, okay, I'm going to go out and buy a duplex and do this and that. And then I was kind of stuck, like, well, what do I do now? And I wasn't like really I went to like 1 or 2 meetups at the time, met a couple people, but didn't really keep in touch with anybody. And I'm like, man, I need to get back out and start meeting people and start asking questions and seeing what they're doing. Because honestly, there are no stupid questions when you go to these events, right? People are very willing to answer your questions and impart their knowledge on you. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things. And the other part of the networking piece is my podcast itself has helped me with my networking, because I bring on people onto my show that that are doing just some amazing things, like things that I don't even know about, right? And I
Mhm.
get to learn from them. And that's one of the things that I know this as a podcast host. It's one of the selfish things we get to do, is we get to ask the questions that we want to ask. So now I have this person on, and I'm promoting you, right? I'm promoting you on my show. 2, I'm asking you the questions that I want to ask. And 3, it's a win-win for both of us. And hey, let's keep in touch after this is over. And I've had people that have come on my show that I get I get deals in my inbox all the time. Like, hey, Mike, we got A, B, C, and D going on. You want to jump in on this deal with us? And it's just absolutely insane, the deal flow that I get. And it's all because of networking, and utilizing my podcast as a networking tool as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure who said this. I'm definitely not taking credit, but I've heard it somewhere that show me someone's network and I'll show you their net worth. Because it gets to that whole, surround yourself with people that have the same goals, and people that elevate you, right? But then I also think the balance to that is, anytime I've been to a networking event or reached out to somebody, I'm surprised by how I keep being surprised by how generous people are. I think there's a tendency for people to think that, oh, they're competitors, they're not going to help you. But the reality is, most, like you said, 97%, I think that's spot on, are generous with their thoughts and things that they've gone through, and to try and help you, to level up without having to go through all the struggles. But I also think it's the perspective that you enter in. If you enter into that arrangement by talking about what you want, what you're trying to get out of it, then I think you may be met with some resistance. But if you go into it, say, hey, I want to learn from you. You're successful. You're somebody I would love to ask a few questions of. And you take that approach, right? Selfishly, it is to help you learn, right? So you can get better. But for them, they feel like they're helping out, and it makes it a win-win.
Yeah, 100%. And like I said, 97%, there are 3% out there that are probably like, stay away from them.
Right.
And I've seen them out there, but it's not often. And it's just one of those things of beauty that when you realize that there are really some generally good people out there, and real estate investors aren't like these sharks circling in the water like a lot of people think that they are.
Right.
And you realize that they're human too. They're people too. And just like you said too, it is about surrounding yourself with the people that you want to be like, right? There's a famous saying that, I forget who says it, but it's, if you hang out with 5 millionaires, you're bound to be the sixth millionaire, right? So
Right.
that's important, to surround yourself with like-minded people. And sometimes you got to cut dead weight, right? There's people in your life that might be holding you back. And sometimes you might just have to be like, hey, you know what? I'm not going to go out to the bar with you guys on Friday night. I got a real estate meetup that I want to go to because this is going to change my life, you know?
Right. Yeah. Well said. So we talked a little bit about it. You talked about the networking aspect. Any other reasons for why you started a podcast?
Yeah, well, so one, the networking thing wasn't even the reason why I started it. It became a side benefit. And when I realized the opportunity that I had there for networking, I kind of just said, this is like my main focus now, right? But the funny thing is, I started the podcast because Average Joe Finances was a blog. Excuse me. It was a blog, and I was starting this off as a means to share my story, share what I was doing, how I got out of debt, how I was able to purchase this home in Hawaii, and then when I started investing in real estate, like what I was doing with that. And a buddy of mine approached me. He was also in the Navy. He had gone through some really heavy stuff, and he started a podcast on mindset and life changes and things like that. And he told me, he's like, "Hey, Mike, why don't you start a podcast and share what you're talking about on your blog on a podcast and bring guests on and talk about these different things?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, maybe when I get out of the Navy. I just don't think right now I really have the time for that." He's like, "No," he's like, "Trust me, man." He's like, "Podcasting is going to be big." He's like, "It's already starting to take off. You should do it." I was like, "All right, man, twist my arm." So I said, well, if I'm going to do it, I want to do at least one episode a week. And that's what I committed myself to. And oh boy, man, I not realize what I committed myself to with the amount of work that it takes to make a podcast function. And even with doing very minimal stuff, it was still a lot of work. So there's a lot of people that say, "Oh, yeah, you can start a podcast with your phone and some ear pods and this and that, and you're going to be fine. It's so easy." It's really not that easy if you're trying to put out a product that you want people to listen to, right? Because sure, anybody can start a podcast, but there's a reason why most podcasters quit after a couple weeks of doing it, right? So I committed to myself that that's what I was going to do, and that's what I kind of stuck to. And I decided to, about 6 months into it, outsource to get a little bit of help with it, because I felt like I was drowning in all the extra work that it came with, right? But then I realized I had people listening, and that was one of the things that kind of pushed me to keep going. And even at the beginning, like when I had maybe 20 or 40 downloads a month, I thought to myself, I was like, man, nobody's really listening to my show. And then I thought about it from the perspective of, if that was the amount of people in a room, that's like a classroom right there. So I've got that many people listening and feeling like they're coming back, so they like the information that's getting put out. So I said, okay, I'm gonna push a little bit harder on this, and now I'm at the point where I get about 12,000 downloads a month. So it's been absolutely amazing, just to see the growth in like these last 2 years, because I started the podcast in July of 2020. And
Okay.
yeah, and I'm on episode 124, just came out this morning. So yeah,
Nice.
doing good, man.
That story is similar to me in so many ways. I mean, my desire for starting one was just I felt like I was missing out on having good conversations. And obviously it was the middle of the pandemic. And the one thing that I was always concerned about was I'm going to run out of people. Like I have a lot of really good, interesting people that I want to talk to that are in my network, but I always felt like I'd run out of people. And
Yeah, you ain't gonna run out of people.
you don't, if you really put in the time, to your point, and I committed to doing it once a week in February of this year, because I worked with someone who kind of gave me, that unsolicited advice and said, hey, you may want to consider doing it regular so that people can count on it and depend on it. And it's such a huge thing. And echo the whole work thing. The amount of work to get it a good product and get it out there on a weekly basis, it's tough. And then to be able to actually, market it and talk about it on social media, to have things there available for that. So being able to outsource that is a lifesaver. And it's just something where I told my wife when I started doing this, I said, when I stop having fun talking to people and learning from people, then I'll stop. And I honestly don't think that's going to ever stop, because it's just so much fun to talk to people like you from all over the world. I've had people from South Africa. I've had people from Australia. It's just so cool. This medium allows me to talk to somebody on the other side of the world and talk about stuff they got going on and learn from them. It's so neat.
Yeah, technology is amazing, right? We're what, 5,000 miles apart right now.
Right.
You're on the East Coast, I'm in Hawaii, so it's really awesome that we could sit down and have this conversation where before, Zoom and all this other stuff, like, um, we probably would have never crossed paths, right? And that's another beautiful thing that we got out of the unfortunately, but fortunately, one of the good things that we got out of the pandemic, right? Was this big push to get people connected virtually. So I'm definitely thankful for that, and it's helped me with everything that I'm working on. I know it's helped you with what you're working on with the podcast. But man, yeah, that unsolicited advice that your friend gave you is going to pay dividends, right? Because when you stay consistent with it, you're going to find that your following is going to start to really grow, because you're going to have the people that were listening previously. They're going to keep coming back, and new people are going to find your podcast, and they're going to say, okay, oh, cool. It comes out on this day every week. Yeah, I'm going to tune in. Right. For me, that's what I loved about the podcast that I listened to, was the consistency. Right. And that's one of the things that I realized, like, hey, I know that, this episode of Bigger Pockets is going to come out on this day. So when I'm commuting to work, I know I could just go boop and put it on, and it's ready to go. So that consistency piece is key, but it's also key in anything that you do, even with personal finances, right? That consistency, right? You want to be consistent in anything that you do. Don't waver. If you have a goal, if you have something you're pushing towards, don't waver in that. Always strive towards, what your goal is, and getting everything done and knocked out.
Yeah. So what you're saying is there's no such thing as get rich quick. It's consistent habits and investing the right way. And then
100%.
Really your biggest asset is time, to allow these things to appreciate and continue to build over time.
Yeah, time is your biggest asset, but discipline is also a big factor in whatever you do, right? So, because that discipline piece is what's going to give you, the motivation to keep going forth and keep conquering, right? Because once, and actually I say discipline, but it's really the mindset, and we talked about that earlier, right? Having that mindset, once you shift your mindset, there's really no stopping you at that point. You just keep going.
Yeah, great. Well, Mike, this has been a real privilege. I appreciate you giving me a few minutes of your time. So Mike, he is a financial coach, a real estate investor, and a podcast host. His podcast is Average Joe Finances Podcast, and it's a top 1% internationally ranked podcast. So if you want to see what a top 1% podcast sounds like or looks like, give that one a give that one a try. Average Joe Finances Podcast. Thank you very much, Mike. It was great having you on. We'll make sure to put all of this information in our show notes so that our listeners can reach out to you if they want to learn more or they want to check out the podcast.
Thank you so much. And I just want to point out one thing. A top 1% podcast sounds like this right here with what you're doing. So keep doing it, man. You're going to crush it.
All right. I appreciate that. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Thank you for joining us on our journey to learn about various topics. If you'd like to get in touch with the Dad Who Knows Nothing, connect with him at the Dad Who Knows Nothing on TikTok and Instagram, or Dad Knows Zero on Twitter. If you have a moment and you like this episode, drop us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Have a great day and enjoy your journey through this game called life.